So there's kind of two sections of the presentation here. The first part is kind of a recap of Symposium. We intended it for, it actually sold out by a pretty large margin. There was a lot of customers who couldn't get in. So, you know, in many cities, it was a good event for a user group just because there was a lot of customers who couldn't make it. So that's, you know, the first part of the session is a recap of Symposium. And then the second half is really diving into one of the new features they announced called the Sitecore Experience Accelerator. It's kind of a toolkit and a set of accelerators to help build your website quicker. So with that, I wanted to, you know, one, not talk the whole time myself, but also make it a little more entertaining and show some of the snippets of what I call the highlights from Symposium in video format. So,
is the Symposium like yearly, annual?
Annual, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, usually near the end of the year-ish, October, November. So they just had it in New Orleans, and I think next year it's in Las Vegas.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, so the first one is, you know, this is the CEO, and he talks about, you know, customer experience and the journey that users go through. But there's kind of like a little advertisement in here about the capabilities of Sitecore that I think are pretty interesting as far as the features they show and what you can do. So let's see how this works. Path Analyzer is one of the functions within the Sitecore platform to see where users are going and what they're clicking on and how they're getting there or how they're leaving your site. So it's and then the last one they just showed really briefly was the email experience analyzer. Jump to that. Was the shortest one. That's about all they showed. It was just like the two screens there, but a lot of capability as far as you know, what emails were delivered and bounce back and where they clicked on it from and location information, all that info. So those are some of the highlights from the keynote, and this video is available on the if you search Sitecore Symposium, it's on one of the home pages. Any questions or comments on it so far? All right. So there's a couple themes that they had at the conference. One of them was around development standards and accelerators. So they introduced Helix is a Sitecore specific thing. It's really their recommended best practices for development on the platform. They traditionally haven't had that recommendation or guidance, so it's always been up to the partners or customers to figure out how to implement it. And as you can imagine, that has led to a lot of differences in how customers have done things. So there's now they have some guidance, right? It's a decoupled layer model. It forces modularity and compartmentalization. It all breaks things down really for maintenance purposes. When I first looked at this, I thought it was really more about sharing features between projects. So if you had a news rotator carousel, right, and you wanted to use that on one site or another site, you wanted to package it up into one feature. It can offer that capability, but it's really about separating it so that if you wanted to update that module, you don't have to test everything in the entire system. So everything is very tightly coupled or decoupled from each other so that it can be broken down. And when we dive into the experience accelerator, you'll see some of these concepts in there. But essentially, feature is kind of the probably the easiest thing to understand. A feature is the news rotator or search or a provider search, right? Could be another one. So that's a feature that could be broken up into a module, if you will. That's going to have some dependencies on a foundational layer, some services maybe to get data that you need, or maybe a presentation framework like Bootstrap would be in your foundation layer. And then in the project layer is kind of your business logic and what's specific to your website. Goes into that layer. So they're separated so that if you wanted to change out the UI of the front end of your provider search, or something like that, that would be in the project layer module side of it. So it's I think the takeaway is it's good that they have some standards now to follow. You'll get better, if you switch partners or have a different vendor or developer. They should be able to get up to speed on your environment more quickly. Sitecore also built Habitat. Habitat is this example solution that uses the Helix principles. The big thing that was emphasized, though, is it's not a starter site, even though that it is an example and could be used as a base to start a site. It's out on GitHub, and it's actually been out there for about a year, so there's been quite a bit of contribution to it. There's also some controversy from a development standpoint. Because everything is so modular, it breaks everything down, and if you get into Visual Studio, there's lots of Visual Studio projects which in the past have been like a no-no or a performance problem. So there's some things they've done to address that, but just know that that's out there if you're working on development and want to see something of how it was done, maybe in a pattern that you could model for your development. This is a place to look. Sitecore Experience Accelerator. So the second half of our presentation is all about this, so I won't go into too much detail, but it's essentially Sitecore has always been a platform where you install it and you have a blank page. There's really no widgets or UI presentation. Anything to build a page is not really there. You kind of start from a blank slate and you have to build all these things, your rotators, your page layouts, your login controls, your header, your footer, right? All these things you start writing code to build. So this is Sitecore's answer to the market in that, other products and open source platforms have a lot of pre-built modules, and this is their accelerator for that. So it's pre-built UI components and templates so that you can configure, it's almost like a WordPress, right, is a configure your website type product, right? So it's in that mindset, but much more enterprise and scalable and fully compatible with all their other features. So we're going to jump into that later. At Symposium, Sitecore 8.2 was released. So that was another big theme. The technology stack is updated on it. So MVC is where it's at, and Sitecore is put a stronger influence on that as far as they used to support web forms and MVC as a pattern for development. So you definitely want to spend, Elton, when you're ramping up on it, ASP.NET MVC. If you start to learn that, then you'll be one step closer to being Sitecore ready.
Yeah, I have a book already.
Yeah, got your book. All right. And it's built on .NET 4.6, and they are also starting to use .NET Core, Microsoft's open source version of .NET that's cross-platform. They also have SQL always on support, making it more available and resistant to. Yeah. Yep. JavaScript library consistency. So they're using D3 is a JavaScript library. Derek, I know you've used that before. But that path analyzer that they showed in the video is built on that. It used to be a Silverlight thing, which required you to use Internet Explorer and
So the back end functionality is
Yes, the back end, yeah. And they're removing more Silverlight. Some of their experiences were built in that. So, Megan, what that means for you is you can use any browser you want.
Okay.
It's not as difficult anymore. They also came out with this Express migration tool, probably not applicable to you, but will help a lot of customers who are on previous versions can go quickly, to the latest and greatest, as well as, if you guys are going 8.1, which is only one version behind right now, it'll be easier to go forward with this tool. They also made some improvements for data sources. Sitecore has a lot of, if you design it well, Sitecore allows you to reuse content. So you put a rotator on the page and you choose what content you want to plug into that. And you can reuse that content multiple times, right? You may want to have the rotator on the home page, but then if you have a landing page that's specific to a certain vertical or customer type, you could reuse that here, and it just makes it easier for you to select that item. There's a new publishing service. This, if you haven't had Sitecore, you don't really know the pain, but it can be slower to publish when you have lots of items. So there's a concept of you enter your content into a staging environment, and you want to publish it to the production environment. There's a lot of processing that needs to go on. They made it 100 times faster, essentially, is the message, and it's built on the ASP.NET Core. It can also be separated into dedicated instances, and there's different licensing for that, where previously you could separate it into its own server, but you paid for a full server that you weren't really using. So all good things. The path analyzer, and I showed you the video because obviously the video is much better than this picture, where it morphs from the radial to the chart to the table. So that this is that interactive map of where customers have been and what pages they go to. You can also identify 404 errors and things like that. So path analyzer, the major upgrade to it was in 8.2. They also introduced this data exchange framework. So this is really a framework to help, how we showed that customer profile in the demo where they had the one person and all the things that they've done. Well, this is a framework to get data in and out of that, right? So one of the things was, have they had a customer service call, right? So when someone calls up, have to, change their PCP provider, right? They want to, they couldn't figure out how to do it. They could call the help desk, and if, let's say that's on your CRM system, Dynamics or Salesforce or whatever system, you could integrate that into Sitecore so that, as a digital marketer, you could see that, oh, you know what, they've called the help desk a couple times. They've had a couple incidents. Maybe you want to give them a promotional offer for, I don't know, free Band-Aids. I don't know. I'm not really good at that side of it, but obviously for your business case. So this is a framework for bringing that data in and out. And then kind of other news, the big announcement was around cloud. Every software product now is migrating more towards this model where you pay monthly, platform as a service type model. So they announced that they have native Azure deployment integration with 8.2 update 1, which just came out. The announcement for this just came out literally this week. It's fully Azure based using Redis cache, Azure Search, Azure Application Insights, Web Apps, and Azure SQL in lieu of SQL Server. So, another great area to learn is Azure because it's going to go there pretty quickly. Traditionally, it's more of a You can deploy it to an on-premise server or a server running in the cloud. Either one, but now it's more on demand and consumable through these means, which gives you more flexibility in the long run. You can spin up an instance quicker. You can scale it quicker as needed, and potentially save money on your infrastructure costs. I didn't let the animation of all my clouds go. There they are. Yeah. With the announcement of Azure, they've also changed their licensing model. So perpetual is what they call, sort of your traditional, the way you buy software is you pay $30,000 and here's your Sitecore and you need 5 of them. So pay me now. Where now it's more of a consumption model is another option, right? So you can pay based on your usage and get more of that scalability if you need it in the open enrollment season or holiday shopping season or Super Bowl, those types of things that that customers are looking for. There's also, different licensing models around a lot of their add-ins, as far as commerce, the experience accelerator, the email platform. PXM is the print experience manager. So if you were a company who had to build glossy brochureware, that's their product for that. They also have a mobile SDK built with Xamarin to, if you wanted to have a dedicated mobile app for your customers, you could manage all that content in Sitecore and have everything seamlessly flow between the two. There's a couple. Telligent is a community for your customers, and the other one is a social integration. So some of the announcements there. Coveo is another third-party product. Not that it was necessarily announced by Sitecore, but it was a big happening, I guess, at Symposium. Was they released a Sitecore Enterprise Cloud Edition. It is a step above the out-of-the-box Sitecore search experience and does the machine learning technology where if you search for, if your brother is a printer manufacturer, and they have a website, right? If someone searches for ink, but, they were really looking for toner, right? It can start to figure that out that, this person kept on searching for this, but they clicked on this, right? Those two must go together, and you don't have to set that all up. It figures it out. So it's, if you're really fine-tuning search and want analytics around the search, this is a very compelling product, but it's also more money.
Yeah, so it's the free little
that was
dollar signs, is that saying that it's pretty pricey?
It is more expensive, right? And they have different tiers. They still have an on-premise and a pro and an enterprise level, but the enterprise level is pretty expensive. But that's where you get all the fancy features, right? Yep. So looking into the future of what they also talked about coming down the road, 8.3. There's going to be a new forms module. XConnect is another way with API to get data in and out of the customer profile. Some Windows server support updates for the latest and greatest there. Some CRM connectors, and also getting rid of all of Silverlight in their products. So yes. So that's what's coming.
He's gonna be so upset.
So that's kind of the end of the symposium recap. The next portion is going to go into the experience accelerator. We can pause and take a quick break if you guys need it, or just keep on running through. Need a drink or anything? Very good.
I'm fine.
I have
Your question, yeah.
now that you're going to
deploy to Azure,
Mhm.
what would be the benefit of not deploying to Azure? Because I mean, getting a site, like if I want my Sitecore,
Right.
my Sitecore up and running, it takes time and energy and
Right.
hardware and whatnot.
Sure.
So what would be the reason to stay on premise?
Certainly your integration, potentially with other internal systems could be one. But again, in the cloud, you can connect those pretty easily nowadays. If you're looking to deploy, maybe your corporate standard is Amazon Web Services, right? The on-premise version would, work for you if you want to go to Rackspace or one of those. It's not really clear yet if you're going to save money on, platform as a service or pay more, so there could be.
Do they have any calculators for that yet?
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't seen that. I think it's pretty new, so that's.
You said it came out this week.
Yeah, it came out this week. But
As a developer, would you develop against Azure and then deploy to on-premise? Does it work that way?
you could, yeah. I mean, depending on your packaging model of how you maintain the code and the content, but you certainly could. Even in a hybrid where you use your local server for Sitecore, but then Azure SQL. Derek was asking about that when he first started. It's like, oh, do I really have to install SQL on my box? Can I just use Azure? Well, now you can. Any other questions? All right, let's keep on rolling. So Sitecore Experience Accelerator. I mentioned a little bit earlier, but kind of going another level deep. What it is, it's an add-on module from Sitecore. This is that accelerator, WordPress configurator for your site. It's compatible with 8.1 and 8.2. So even though they just announced it and 8.2 is their latest version, it's also compatible with 8.1. So customers on that can use it. It is priced and licensed separately. The partner call that I was on, they indicated that it was probably about 30% of your overall software cost. So that is pretty steep for an add-on product, in my opinion. But for some, it may make sense, right? If you we'll go into the use cases later, but note that it is an add-on product, right? It's not just there because you have Sitecore. It's a toolkit of pre-built components, an accelerator essentially for site creation and implementation, so that you don't have to write as much code and have the developers do as much work in custom code. They can now configure it, making it easier to maintain and upgrade, and less moving parts. It surfaces as a new tab in the Experience Editor. If you haven't used Sitecore, you probably don't know what the Experience Editor is, but I'll show you today in the demo. It also has a base information architecture, so that's another positive, is that you normally have to kind of start out with the design and say, well, what is my architecture of my pages, and what do I need on the page? What fields do I want, on the pages? What layout components am I going to need? So there's some of that built in, so you don't have to think as much about that. So you can just start building, essentially. It's also a site creation wizard. So there's a tenant model where you have you can have multiple sites. So it can support your intranet, your public website, your authenticated site, maybe microsites, enrollment sites, different plans, things like that could all be housed in one Sitecore instance. There's also a theme wireframe mode. So you could, in theory, have the people who come up with the design of your site wireframe right inside Sitecore and start building the site, and you could add content and kind of see how that would look before you get to visual and creative design. You can also export and import themes. So as you're working in that wireframe mode and you get your content all set, you can export that as a static page and have someone apply CSS, JavaScript to it, and then import it back in, and it gets applied to the site. It's also mobile first, right? So you don't have to think about that. It's responsive on the Bootstrap framework. It can also do adaptive support, where if you want, on the iPad to be a very specific experience, you can have that as well. And then it also has some drag and drop page features. So if you want a widget on the page, you just drag it over and put it on the page, where previously you had to kind of click and press add and then go through a menu. And lastly, it's a extensible framework for developers to build sites. So why would you want it? This is the big selling point, is that you can reduce your time to market. They say you can reduce your project timeline by 80%, right? If it took you 3 months to build the project, in theory you could get something launched in a month. Now I always take that with a grain of salt and be a little skeptical, but because you can do the visual design in parallel with the front-end development and customization, you can get that content entry phase of the project, which is normally at the very end, going on in parallel. So you can start doing some of these things in parallel. That is, of course, if you're willing and have a desire to do things in parallel. Sometimes that's not always the easiest model, right, depending on your team. Sometimes it's nice to have those clean breaks and make sure that everything is finalized in the user experience before you start building something to reduce the rework. So where does it fit? Personally, right now it's a new product. I think it fits well for microsites, something that is not very complex, but you need something up and quickly. You can kind of configure it and get it going, apply some CSS, and you're good to go. If you have a lot of multiple sites, so like SC Johnson sells thousands of products, and they have all these microsites for Glade plugins and these different things, right? This would be a good use case for them, in my opinion, because there's different tenants. You can have these different themes. Implementations with lower complexity, where you don't need a lot of customization. Smaller sites that just want that marketing experience platform. So if you sell a certain product but really want all that marketing and customer experience functionality, you could get going with Sitecore. Maybe partners with not as familiar resources with designing and styling for Sitecore. This is a way to kind of export it and have them live in their world of HTML and CSS only, and not really have to understand anything Sitecore. And certainly if your timeline is condensed or needed to be shortened, it's an option to look at. Conversely, anything large, custom interfaces where it's heavily Angular single page application type model. I think this is a key point, is if your content authors are not as technology savvy, it's very powerful, but it could be overwhelming to someone that say, okay, well, here's a blank page, and you can put a control on it and start designing your own layout on the fly, right? Where we've found success in our projects is building only exactly what they need, right? To keep them on the guardrails and the happy path of, you want to create a news page, here's your template, you can only fill in these 5 fields, you're up and going, right? Where with this, you could give them, you can still do that, right? You could build it in a very controlled manner, but you can also, give them a lot of flexibility, right? And they could get lost, and then you have to help them with a lot of things. So there's some pros and cons. If your internal shop is a .NET MVC development team, and they can crank out code, all day and night, you may not want to pay for this, right? You could build all of it yourself. or maybe if you have an outsourced team that's not tightly coupled, that whole parallel thing with an outsourced team seems kind of set up for failure. So that's another reason you might pass. So with that, we'll demo. So switch over to the browser here. Get rid of that guy. So this is the Sitecore interface. When you log in, you have a username or password. That based on what credentials you have, that's going to give you access to all the different features. Normally, you start out in Content Editor. So Sitecore has this tree view of where your content is stored. When it's installed out of the box, all you get is this little home icon and really nothing else besides the skeleton framework. And you have to create things. When you have the Sitecore Experience Accelerator installed, you can go into the menu and insert tenants and tenant folders. Tenant folder is just a way to organize your tenants. If you have public versus internal versus departmental, you can organize them.
When you say tenant, you mean like separate sites?
Separate sites, yeah. When we get into it, it's really kind of a place where you can share features and functionality within a tenant, but you could have multiple sites within them.
Would these have, like, from a user-facing perspective, would they have like separate domains?
Tenants are really more organizational. The site would be the different domains.
Okay. So
Yeah.
it'd be /Detroit or /.
Yes, it could be. Yep. So when you create a tenant, these are the features that you can select. So again, if you are creating like a microsite and they don't need all the features, right, you can hide some of those so that it's not as confusing or overwhelming for those. Once you have a tenant, you can insert sites and site folders. Again, site folders are just a way to organize your sites if you want. When you go into the site, now this is where you give it a site name, what is going to be the URL, and what's the default language. Sitecore is multilingual capable, but it does have a default language. So what you choose here will apply to that site. At the site level, there's more features that you can turn on and off. I've seen a blog post on, you could create every website has a contact us or a location page and a location finder of where are all our locations, right? You could literally build a location finder with a Google Maps and search results all, from just right-clicking and configuring all this, right? So it's pretty powerful. There's a lot of features in here, from events and forums and redirect social, all the features that are in this are selectable here. And then lastly, there's this concept of themes, right? So you can, out of the box, you get this wireframe theme and a basic theme, and you can create or add new themes that can be used for your site. It's really more to support the export and import process as opposed to, I guess it could be if you're a retailer and you have a seasonal theme, right, for Thanksgiving and the holidays or President's Day, right? You can go crazy with your themes if you wanted to, and easily switch between one and the other. One tip I found is to create a theme when you're creating a site. It just makes it a little bit easier to have something to import and export. Behind the scenes, it runs a script. So there's some PowerShell extensions that need to be installed as a prerequisite. But what that does is it creates a lot of stuff for you, right? So this is the site creation wizard part of it. So once you fill out that form, it creates a lot of content, right? So for this meeting, I created a Detroit tenant and a Detroit site, and I didn't do anything after that. And you get out of the box this homepage. places to store your data. Remember, I said Sitecore is big on sharing content. So if you wanted all your carousel data to be in one place, your different maps, your media, um, promos, tabs, videos, right? There's lots of places to store your data. There's also presentation options that we'll get into a little bit, as well as settings for your site, right? When I went in here, this one made me smile. It was like the cookie warning. It's something like every site has to have it if you're, European based or comply with certain regulations. You've got to say that this site uses cookies, right? It's built in there. They thought of it. You can change your warning message. It's multilingual. You can, select what kind of a button is, what other features, what pages it won't be on. If there's like a legal page you don't want it on, or like the shopping cart page, probably not a good page to always have that on. So they've thought a lot about what sites commonly have and use, right? So that's my key takeaway, I guess. So great. You have this tenant, set up. The other part of it is it also provisions things into templates. So remember, when we talked about Helix, they had that feature, foundation, and project. Those are the Helix principles of how you should organize things. You start to see that in Sitecore, in the Experience Accelerator as well. So for your tenants, project is kind of the most end user facing layer of the modules. You have your tenant. So in the Detroit tenant, here is what my base page information architecture is. It's going to contain title and content, and my homepage inherits from that. And if I wanted to add fields on my homepage, like, I don't know, the Facebook link, right, is maybe a field that I wanted for on every homepage, I could add those in here and start to build, customize, and extend the templates. And it's all inheritance based. So as they add more features into the foundation and you upgrade, you'll get those features in your project or your tenant. So to show it in action, this is the content editor again. This is kind of where you build out the tree and structure. But to actually edit a page, you go into this experience editor is what it's called. So it's kind of like your live editing pane. And as you can see, it's just a blank page right now. I haven't done anything. And you get this toolbox. This is the toolbox of all the controls. So, here's your carousel. If I wanted a carousel, drag and drop that on the page. If I wanted to, put columns and rows and kind of make this a certain layout, I could use page structure. If I wanted to do, HTML or text or an image, right, I can start adding components. Navigation controls, media controls, maps, forms, right? All the things that you would normally have to build is all in here. There's also this Experience Accelerator tab. So that was one of the things when I said, what is XA? This is one of the things that it adds, is the ability within the Experience Accelerator to import and export your themes, change your theme, change your page designs, and we're going to get into that a little bit in the demo, but it's another tool to help you configure right within the site. So in order to kind of walk you through this demo, we're going to build a footer, right? Because it's a pretty easy demo. There's this concept of page designs and partial designs. I've got a slide on that. Here we go. So partial designs are, your footer. So if you see over here, this is what we're going to create. It's this copyright partial design. A partial design goes with a page design to create your page layout. So you can have multiple partial designs in a page layout. What we're going to build is the homepage layout with a footer partial design. And when you, I don't have the animation, but when you are done, your page is going to be assembled of all those things. So, you know, if you change your copyright from 2016 to 2017, all you have to update is that, you know, one partial design, and it'll be updated across the site. Some pain there? A lot of pain. I hear you. So we want to create a partial design. So I'm going to click on partial designs, insert a partial design, and I'm just going to name it footer. And when you create a partial design, it actually takes you to that partial design, and I've turned on this navigator is one of the options, this navigation bar that shows kind of where you're at in that tree to give you some context. So now that I'm on the footer, I want to put some text, right? And I see here I have rich text, reusable, and rich text. The difference is whether or not it looks locally on that page for text or if it looks in a global location. Because we want this to be on every page and the same for everyone, we're going to use reusable, so it's global. So I'm dragging and dropping from the left over to the footer area. This is that data association, right? So I'm saying I want text on the page. It's saying, what text do you want to put on the page? Do you want to select existing content? Well, I don't have any content yet for this, so I just want to create new content. So I'll just say footer copy. Say OK. So that's going to give me now a rich text field, and I can type copyright 2016, you know, exclamation point, whatever. So you can put your content on the page. I'm going to go ahead and click the Save button. That saves this partial design. I also want to, you know, kind of spice this up and put the title of the current page, so something that's dynamic in the footer, just, you know, so the user kind of knows where they're at on the site. And this is to show off another functionality, not really a great use case. But so I want to put the title field. So title is another page content. I'm going to drag it over here. Title field, it's going to ask me for some properties or parameters. I'm just going to leave all those default and say, OK. So now I've got a page, you know, and when my site is rendered, at the footer of every page, it's going to have this copyright, and it's going to say the title field at the bottom. So next, so now I want to go back to my home page and actually use this, right? So I'm gonna use the navigation here to go back to the home page, and I can see, well, my footer is not there, right? So I've got more to do. So partial designs go inside a page design, so I need to create a page design. So if I click on page design, I can insert a page design, and I'm going to call this the homepage design. And really all this is just a container that holds objects, and the order in which you put these objects helps render them out. All we have right now is a footer, but if we had a header, maybe a left nav, right, we would select all those partial designs that help build the page. Say OK, save that guy. Again, nothing happens right here because now I have a design, but I'm not telling the home page to use that design, right? So to do that, I can go into one of these two options. Site page designs is kind of a global thing. Every time I use a home template, I'm going to say use the home page design. Kind of makes sense. So I'm going to say OK. And click Save is the key to actually see something happen. Now I can see, all right, cool. I see copyright 2016 and Detroit happens to be my page title for this page. and I've got my footer. And you know, I could publish that out and you know, get running with content. I don't really have any content, so let's add some content to this page that is just specific to this page. And this is again where how much flexibility do you want to give the user? I'm going to use the splitter columns. So I'm going to drag and drop this kind of in the center of the page. And this is kind of your WYSIWYG. I want to configure a page. You can choose how many columns you want, you know, how wide those columns are. I'm just going to choose add another column. So I have 3 columns. After that, I have to say how wide I want it. It's a 12 grid layout. So I'm going to make each of them 4 wide, quad wide. So click on all of them, make them 4 units wide. And so now I have that. I want to put some text on there just because that's really easy. So I'm going to put rich text in the first one, and it wouldn't be a good demo without hello world. And click save. Obviously, if you know, we could drop a promo banner in each of those, or a carousel. You know, any of these things would work. The concept really is just, you know, you have some things that are standardized and some things that are part of the page. Next, so I want to jump back into Content Editor and see kind of what has happened since we did that. So if I look now under the home page, I see this data in that text 1 field, right? So it's sort of creating things in your tree for you, you know, based on you drag and dropping things onto the page. That's pretty hard to do, you know, in a custom development mode, and it's pretty powerful. So that's kind of where things go. If I look in the shared data section that's not specific to that page, here's I have my footer copy, right? So I don't have to do everything inline in the experience editor. I can also do it here. Another kind of cool thing they have is rendering variants. So what if you want, you know, one control, but sometimes you want it to look a little bit different based on the scenario, right? Maybe it's on the home page, it looks one way. Maybe on a you know, the checkout page, you want a different variant of it. So they have these things called rendering variants, and there's a title field as one of the components that we dragged onto the page. You can insert a variant here. We'll just call it the Detroit variant. In here, I'm going to add a field, and I want it to be the title field. And so this is what's kind of cool about it, is you can start to configure your HTML output of this component, right? So I can choose in that title field, what do I want that wrapped in? Do I want it wrapped in a div, a paragraph, an H1, right? So let's make it an H1. I can also prepend or add text to the end with prefix and suffix. So I could put like page name and save that. Now if I go back to my partial designs of the footer, on this title field, I can choose a different variant, right? So I want the Detroit variant. Save that. Go back to my home page. And now I have different HTML here, right? It put the H1, so it's bigger, and it's prefixed it with page name, right? So you can start to configure the HTML that you want in the footer, you know, based on these variants and things like that. It's super complex as far as configuration and all the options. You definitely need to spend time figuring it out. But wanted to show you some of the configuration options. The last portion is the themes. So I could export this theme, and there's kind of a wizard for that. It's gonna zip it up into, and I've already done this, zip it up into a file, and here's your HTML page, right? That's all contained externally from Sitecore. So you can give this zip file to a designer. He could crack it open. He or she could crack it open in Sublime, right, or their editor of choice. Within the HTML page, there's these add your CSS classes here tags, so that if you want to add a class to something to help style it, you put it there, and when we import that theme back in, it'll keep track of that and apply it to those components. And then there's also all the CSS, all your styles, are in here. So I've got a main CSS, and the change I made here was making the background color orange, because that's very exciting. So you could then apply this theme. I don't have this theme on the Detroit tenant, but on the Right Point tenant, if I go to, let's say, the home page, this is kind of the wireframe theme. But if I switch from the wireframe theme to the Right Point theme, click Save, now I'm in orange. Right, so there's this import and export business that you can get your themes. There's a demo on that video also that they kind of go through this, and it shows a really professionally styled website and what the themes could look like. But you kind of get the gist of it, right? So switching back from the demo, there's also composites, and I briefly mentioned like a carousel, but these composites essentially allow you to nest components. So you could take a promo component and wrap it in a carousel so that it rotates, right? You could rotate promos. You could rotate, any one of those other components, right? So there's composites, this building blocks for building other things. Super, level 500 depth of how you could create your own components. There's some things that you have to be aware of and make it multi-tenant, and follow some patterns and implement the right interfaces, and you can build your own, essentially, is the message. There's a few reference links here. There's a webinar on SXA if you wanted to get into it. The downloads are out on the for all the packages are out on the Sitecore website. There is limited documentation. There's some out there, but some of the main functions that you would do are out there. I think that's one of the biggest downsides, is there's not a lot of documentation. So I'd be hesitant to jump in right on day one of the release of this, but I think it'll grow and be pretty powerful in future deployments. I kind of hit most of these, but there, some limitations that I see is there's a lot of conventions to follow. You got to know where to put things and what to name them. Not a lot of documentation. Cost is one limitation. Sitecore is still working on the upgrade model, so will everything float over or not? Governance, but for now, it's something to explore as a possibility. So, final thoughts, try building a prototype, determine if the cost benefit works out for you, try it on a lower complexity site, maybe wait for documentation. That's it.
So do they have trials of that right now, or is it just you have to buy it and see whether you like it?
So if you're a partner, you can have it added to your license so you can try it out. For customers, I'm guessing they've got to have something in your development license that if you wanted to do that, you could have it added, but it is something they do have to activate on your license essentially. So yeah.